Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, February 13th, 2017. A frantic Korean man approached an airport receptionist in the departure hall of Terminal 2 in Kuala Lumpur International Airport. He claimed someone had grabbed him from behind and splashed a mysterious liquid on his face, and he was now in some discomfort. The receptionist sent him to the airport's medical clinic to be looked at by doctors, but it wasn't long until he became unresponsive. Less than 20 minutes later, he was dead. The liquid that was smeared on his face turned out to be VX nerve agent, a chemical weapon categorized as a weapon of mass destruction. The victim was Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother of North Korea's supreme leader Kim Jong-un, who likely gave the order. Before his untimely death, Nam was set to return home to Macau after a business trip in Kuala Lumpur. Macau was where he had lived anonymously with his family the past 2 decades. But while he never made it back, the aftermath of his assassination brought a great deal of unwanted attention to the Chinese city he lived in. For the long-standing secretive relationship between Macau and North Korea was now in the limelight. Macau is a city on the western side of the Pearl River estuary in southern China, about 2,200 kilometers or 1,400 miles from the Hermit Kingdom. It is known for being many things: the most densely populated region in the world, a former colony of the Portuguese Empire, one of only 2 special administrative regions of China, and what most may know it as, the Las Vegas of Asia. But there's one more title, because for the past 5 decades, it has also been North Korea's international base of operations. Since the 1950s, the United States, along with a number of other countries, had imposed numerous sanctions on North Korea, affecting their financial assets and banking transactions. This led to the Kim regime pursuing other avenues to connect with the outside world. Now, in the late 1950s, a small group of North Koreans close to Kim Il-sung, grandfather to Kim Jong-un and the first in the Kim dynasty, arrived in Macau and Hong Kong. Both cities were attractive to the regime due to the multitude of international banks and the relative ease in which they could engage in illicit activities. Remember, back then Macau was still a Portuguese colony and Hong Kong a British one. Both cities provided a favorable environment for the North Koreans, but it was Macau in particular that had the distinct advantage. You see, the Chinese authorities had always exercised more control and influence over the smaller territory, which meant for the North Koreans, it was a much better place for their shady businesses and clandestine operations. In the Korean War, China, along with the Soviet Union, had supported the Communist North, and since then had maintained close diplomatic relations. Hong Kong was also under British rule, and the British were allied with the imperialist Americans, who they had just fought in the Korean War, so that option was certainly less ideal. Macau, on the other hand, was ruled by the Portuguese, who had remained neutral in world affairs, keeping out of foreign conflicts. So it seemed clear Macau was the way forward. In the decades that followed, North Korea went on to establish Macau as a financial and logistical hub, acting as their point of contact with foreign markets. Indeed, there were illicit activities, but many were legitimate, involving property investments, restaurant startups, and the purchasing of various standard goods. During this early period, economic growth in North Korea was actually higher than in South Korea. But as we all know, this didn't last. The 1970s and 80s saw mismanagement by the government, leading to economic stagnation. Things got worse with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, where a significant portion of aid to the Hermit Kingdom was halted. By this point, North Korea was in dire need of money, and their illegal endeavors seemed a viable way out. And so from the 90s onwards, Macau gained an even more important role in their global strategy to finance the regime. The North Koreans increased their activities in the city with more black market trade, drug trafficking, the passing of counterfeit money, counterfeit goods, and the procurement of weapon systems. Now, much of this made its way through a secret department of the North Korean government based in Macau called the Zokwang Trading Company, which officially dealt with machinery and textiles trade, pretty ordinary stuff, but in reality functioned as a sort of criminal enterprise. It is said to be the most potent overseas tool of the North Korean government. Of course, Zokwang and North Korea deny this, but many sources have backed this up, including Okwa, a former North Korean agent who claimed to have spent 6 months training at the offices of the Zokwang Trading Company. She was assigned to live in Macau and to learn Cantonese in order to impersonate local Chinese residents, which came in useful when sent on one of her many overseas missions, the most infamous being the bombing of Korean Air Flight 858 in 1987, which killed 115 people. Speaking of, the Zokwang offices was allegedly the planning base of many terrorist acts over the years, including the deadly Rangoon bombing in Burma, present-day Myanmar, with an assassination attempt of then South Korean President Chun Doo-hwan. But it doesn't end there. Because in 1995, a new opportunity arose for the regime when Macau opened their very first airport, the Macau International Airport. North Korea's state-owned airline Air Koryo sought to open a branch in the city, which led to the launch of a new flight between Pyongyang and Bangkok, with a stopover in Macau. The thing about the flight, though, was that the frequency was irregular, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, and it carried basically no passengers. But that didn't matter, because for them, it was really all about the cargo. Luxury items for the elites, like whiskey, brandy, and cigars rather made the journey, as well as contraband goods such as counterfeit cigarettes, weaponry, heroin, and crystal meth, all helping to finance the regime. Now, the Portuguese authorities in Macau did try to stem the North Korean activities, but their efforts were somewhat ineffective, which isn't too surprising considering their inability to control even the local triads. The turf wars got pretty crazy. But regardless, the Portuguese still gave them pushback, which is why in 1999, when Portugal handed Macau back to China to be ruled as a special administrative region, just like Hong Kong was 2 years earlier from the British, it was a huge win for North Korea, as it gave them an even greater boost. As the managing director of Zhokwang himself put it, our nation has more friendly relations with China. Compared with the previous Portuguese government, it is easier for us to stay here, do business, and apply for documents. He, of course, was referring to their legal ventures, but it's a statement that likely extends to all their activities. Now, around this time was when Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother, known to his friends as Johnny, made his way to Macau. He had previously served as North Korea's Ministry of Public Security in Pyongyang, and was the heir apparent to his father Kim Jong-il. But then, after an embarrassing incident where he was arrested for using a fake passport to visit Tokyo Disneyland, he lost favor, and his younger brother Kim Jong-un became leader. Regardless, Johnny Kim still maintained a relationship with the regime, and now based in Macau, was said to have fulfilled the role of a kind of middleman in dealings between North Korea and the outside world. But the outside world was about to change everything. Because in January 2002, the American President George W. Bush coined the term axis of evil to describe foreign governments that sponsored terrorism and who had sought weapons of mass destruction. And he listed 3 culprits: Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. This was the turning point. As a result, North Korean activity in Macau was placed under heavy surveillance, as the presence of American intelligence was strengthened. In 2005, the United States Treasury Department accused a particular bank in Macau, the Delta Asia Bank, of being a willing pawn for the North Korean government to engage in corrupt financial activities through Macau. Note, North Korean authorities had no access to the international banking system, so banks that agreed to act as intermediaries played a crucial role in helping them evade sanctions. As such, US companies and financial institutions were ordered to cut ties with the Delta Asia Bank, which led to about $25 million worth of North Korean funds being frozen. North Korea was not happy with this and tried desperately to retrieve the money. Now, the truth of the matter is that the Delta Asia Bank wasn't actually the only bank in Macau that worked with North Korea. In fact, nearly all banks in Macau had handled North Korean funds, including larger banks like the Bank of China. So the question is, why was only one bank targeted, and a relatively small bank at that? Well, Delta Asia was really just a symbolic target. US regulators singled them out because the shutdown of a smaller bank would create less financial disruption to the system while still getting the message across. It acted as a deterrence to other banks, and it worked. Foreign businesses and banks became unwilling to engage with North Korea, as they didn't want to be associated with the regime's illegal activities, as well as fearing exclusion from the American banking system. This created a sort of informal financial embargo of North Korea. Now, there was also another reason for targeting only one bank, and that was to avoid an all-out clash with China, while still sending a very clear message to them. Remember, North Korea's survival in general depends mostly on China, and both parties are aware of this, which is actually why many believe that Kim Jong-un extended a courtesy to China by assassinating his brother Kim Jong-nam in Malaysia, rather than where he lived in Macau, a Chinese city. It would have been a mess for China to deal with, and this could be seen as a sign of respect. With a spotlight now on their activities in Macau and further economic restrictions being placed by the international community, the North Koreans decided to pull back, and over time moved many of their operations further north to Zhuhai, a mainland Chinese city. This meant the Zhokwang Trading Company too had to relocate across the border. Now fast forward to today. The North Korean presence in Macau and even in Zhuhai has dwindled. Yes, Macau is still a prominent base, and the regime's financial networks in China, forged over decades, are still well established today. but they've since smartly expanded their core operations to other regions like Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa. If we look back, all their decisions, from setting up a base in Macau to now diversifying their channels worldwide, can be traced back to, obviously, Pyongyang, but more specifically, a secret organization in Pyongyang called Room 39. This Room 39's objective has always been to seek as many ways to earn foreign currency for the Kim family through illicit economic activities. It is critical for their continued power, enabling them to buy political support and helping fund their nuclear weapons program. Macau has been one of their primary focuses throughout the years, but more recently, their approach has centered around hacking and malicious cyber activities, working alongside another government group, Bureau 121, which is North Korea's premier cyber warfare unit. Together, they're a lethal combination, said to have robbed multiple banks around the world, including, most famously, that of the Bangladesh Bank back in 2016, with a $1 billion heist attempt. But nation-states, governments like North Korea, are not the only ones stealing people's money and taking advantage of their poor cybersecurity practices, because the UN estimates 80% of these breaches are actually from highly organized and ultra-sophisticated criminal gangs, targeting everyday people like you and I.